Салям алейкум.
Салям алейкум.
Мы сейчас собираемся ехать к Мубейyin или место. И сегодня хотим вам представить тех замечательных людей, которые по факту внесли огромный вклад в отражение действительности крымско-татарского народа в мировой плоскости. И место и Mubeyyin выпускали практически 10 лет крымско-татарскую газету на английском языке.
Crimean Review.
И поэтому мы считаем, что это действительно очень важно, чтобы наш народ знал о таких людях, как Mubeyyin или место.
Salam alaikum. Salam alaikum.
Which is which? I got confused again. Zera and Zarema. Which of you is Zera and which of you is Zera? Welcome.
Thank you.
My makeup okay? I have to tell you a little bit about my childhood because I was born in Crimea. When we left, I was 40 days old, very young child. So I spent the first 6 years of my life in the refugee camps in Germany. So that life there was difficult, so I did not have any dreams. There was no time to dream about what I was going to become. But my 6 years of life in the refugee camps taught me something very important. I always questioned, why are we here? Don't we have homes? Don't we have relatives? Don't we have a neighborhood? Why are we here? I always thought about what happened to us as a child, subconsciously maybe. And when at the age of 6, we immigrated to Turkey. High school I finished in Turkey. I didn't have a dream. Always I worried about who are we, why are we here? Even in Turkey as refugees, I always felt like a refugee, and I didn't have really a specific goal as a child. As I went along, and I became more and more involved in the plight of our people. At home, we always talk about Crimea. Half of my family was left in Crimea. So we were worried about our future, what was going to happen to us. So as a profession, I didn't even consider becoming a lawyer, a doctor, or anything like that. I was worried about the plight of my people. That was always consumed my time. Kahvenizi içiniz. Both of my parents are from Crimea. My mother is from Warren, Sudak, and my father is in the next town, Kapskor, Sudak. So we are called Yalıboylu. Our family left Crimea when I was 40 days old during the war, during the really difficult times of the war, when the Germans, it was really a difficult, confusing time in Crimea. People didn't want to stay in Crimea because the Russian forces were coming, and at that time the German forces were retreating, leaving Crimea. So our people had a choice either to stay and suffer, or leave Crimea and go to places totally unknown to them. We went to Yevpatoria. My family left with other, maybe 5,000, 6,000 other Crimean Tatars, and they didn't know where to go. They went to Romania first, and then from Romania they went to traveled around Europe as displaced people. They didn't have any place to settle down. So for 2 or 3 years they traveled like people, they called them DP, displaced people. They went from one refugee camp to another. They went to Austria, Germany, some went to Italy. In the refugee camps, we lived there for about 6 years. Then in 1950 they decided, I have to tell you the story because it was my grandmother, paternal grandmother, when we found out that we could leave and go to any country in the world. My paternal grandmother, Allah rahmet eylesin, Meryem babaannem, she gathered the family and said, look, we have the opportunity to go anywhere in the world, but we are Muslims, we are Crimean Tatars, we are Turkic people. The best country for us to go is Turkey. And she loved coffee, and she said, this is very, I'll never forget this, and she said to my family, take me to Turkey, let me go and drink coffee underneath a coffee tree and die there drinking my coffee. After I die, you can go anywhere you want. So because of my grandmother's wishes, the whole family emigrated, went to Turkey. We lived in Eskişehir. The reason we went to Eskişehir was because there was a Tatar population. Eskişehir is known. I was educated basically in Eskişehir. We lived in Eskişehir for about 10 years, just before my graduation from high school. My father came to United States first, and there was really a big conflict between United States and the USSR over the missiles in Cuba. My father was afraid that there was going to be another war and the family was going to be divided. So he asked us to leave everything aside and come and join him to United States. So that's why we immigrated to United States in 1961. I went to Bridgeport University, but my English was so poor. I didn't, I didn't speak English that well. It was a very difficult time for me. So I went to University of Bridgeport and graduated from, in 1963 I went to University of Bridgeport, and in 1967 I graduated with a degree in political science. Because I want to study political science, and I want to really disseminate information that tell the world what happened to my people. I want to join the United Nations, maybe with a degree of political science. I thought maybe I would have a better chance, but of course it was very difficult. I was not a US citizen. I was not, my English was not that good, but my goal, at that time I had a goal to work in an international organization to tell the world the plight of the Crimean Tatar people. Actually, the history of Crimean Tatar people is my history. My family is my history. So I was actually telling the world what happened to my family and what happened to my people. That's the reason I studied political science. Take time, drink your coffee. Sen içmiyorsun demiş.
No. You know I don't drink coffee.
Ne yapayım? Kararırım deyip korkay herhalde.
Yeah.
The Crimean Tatars who emigrated to United States at the beginning were a very small group, maybe 10 families, and they grew, more and more people came, and they decided to finally establish an American Association of Crimean Turks. They said Turks because they were afraid to use Tatar, the name Tatar. They were afraid that this will hurt our people in Uzbekistan. We didn't want to say anything about Tatars. So they established the American Association of Crimean Tatars on November 14, 1961. and our family and a few families were on the first few group of people. The association was basically a cultural organization, try to maintain our cultural, our language and all that. But we were closely, since we have relatives in Uzbekistan and all that, we were really afraid, we were worried about them, we want to find out. This does not happen until 1968, when there was the famous 1968-1969 famous Tashkent trials in Uzbekistan. 10 Crimean Tatars were they were in court, they were being tried in Russian court and Soviet court, and all the documents of that trial, Tashkent trials, were smuggled out to West, to England in 1968. That's how we found out that our people were really actively seeking their rights. They were active. So we decided, a small group of us decided that it was not dangerous. Our people needed help. We tried to relay this message to our group, our Jamiyat, but they insisted that our Jamiyat is a cultural Jamiyat. We shouldn't get involved in politics. And that's what, this was in 1976, we finally decided to separate, become political organization. In addition to our Jamiyat, we established the Crimea Foundation in 1976, and that's how after that we really increased our political activities. For example, we were going to conferences representing Crimean Tatars, telling people what happened, how our people were deported. And we've officially established the Crimea Foundation in 1976, and the goal was to disseminate information about the Crimean Tatar national movement in Uzbekistan, in the Soviet Union. We were publishing books, we were publishing a magazine, we were going to conferences and representing our people, letting people know that there is such a thing as the Crimean Tatar people. As you know, the Soviet government was denying. They were saying there was no Crimea, there was no such people as Crimean Tatars. And we insisted, from that point, we tried to tell the world that the Crimean Tatars exist, and what happened to them is really a genocide. Then we tried to work on to educate the world public as well as the American public what happened to Crimean Tatar people. That's how the foundation was started in 1976, because Jamiyat did not want to get involved in political activities. They were afraid that their relatives or the people they have in Uzbekistan might be harmed by the Soviet government. All the information, the news, the secret documents we were receiving from Uzbekistan at that time indicated that our people were actively working to, there was such a thing as Crimean Tatar national movement. They have a national movement to return to Crimea. Their information we try to disseminate to world public. We tried to use different methods. We were writing letters to senators, congressmen, to President of the United States. It was a very small activity. Then we began to go to schools. We went from elementary schools, high schools, the universities, try to inform American public as well as world public what happened to Crimean Tatar people. And we felt that that was not enough also. I personally decided that we should publish a magazine and distribute this information to a wider audience. Of course, there was no internet at that time, a typewriter. It was very difficult, but I was determined to create a magazine. I used the red carnation as a symbol because we received a pin from Crimea. Red carnation became a symbol of our activities here. So I used that on the cover. So in 1986, I began to publish the Crimean Review, and we were publishing twice a year because the time, it was difficult for one person to do. My wife Lemis was helping me with all the work, but in the meantime I was working full-time. I had a job. Sometimes I was working till 2 o'clock in the morning on the magazine, getting up at 6 o'clock and going to work. That was very difficult, but I want to do it. I need to do it, I felt. So the magazine was being published. It became successful, went to libraries. I had many demands from all over the world trying to get my magazine. But of course, because of financial situation and time situation, I couldn't continue. We did it until 1995. We have to go back to how this organization began. At the beginning, I told you that we came here, a very small group of people. Crimean Tatar, the Cemiyet, started 5 or 10 families. As time elapsed, more and more people were coming from Turkey, from Crimea, from Uzbekistan. But originally, the founders of the Crimean Tatar Cemiyet were the refugees called muhajirs. These families left Crimea during war. Mostly they went to Turkey, and from Turkey they came here. When they came here, beginning in 1961, they decided to establish this Cemiyet. And this Cemiyet evolved. We decided there was a need to have a place to get together. At the beginning, they were meeting in families' apartments, but then sometime later they rented a place in Brooklyn between Church Avenue and Flatbush. There was the building where they were able to have conferences, were able to meet whatever they were discussing. They were also beginning of a Tatar school, a Sunday school in that place. It was a second floor of a building, a small place, but we began to have our the religious holidays. We began to celebrate there. We had the Bayram namazları. We were being held there, and the Cuma namazları sometimes. It became our center, that little place in Brooklyn, and more people began to arrive from Turkey, from Uzbekistan, from Crimea, and there was a need to a larger place. Year after year, people were really considering to purchase a place, to buy a place, because there was a need for people to get together, to have really a center for Crimean Tatars. And finally, this was established in 1971 when Fikret Yurtar, my brother-in-law, was the president. I was in that organization. Anyway, I was in that group. They decided to buy a place. The current building that they're renovating was purchased in 1971. It was an old sewing factory. Our people, they cleaned it, they renovated it, then made it a center, and we used it for a long time. But of course, as the population of Crimean Tatars increased, it was not enough. So people decided to building became very old, unsafe, and they decided finally to renovate it. That the renovation is going on. It is very difficult, but one thing has to be said about our Cemiyet. We never received any help, monetary help, financial help from any government or any organization. Our Cemiyet, our people did it themselves. With the little money they have, they purchased a building, and now they're into a $1 million renovation. We still don't get any help from other organizations or any government. We still, as they say in Turkish, hala kendi yağımızla kendimiz kavruluyor. Crimean Turks versus Crimean Tatars has always been a difficult issue with us. Originally, when the Cemiyet was formed in 1961, people were still afraid. People didn't have any idea what was happening to their relatives they left behind, what was happening to Crimean Tatars in Central Asia. So they didn't want to get involved and use Crimean Tatars at that time. So they called it Crimean Turk, because even the original Crimean the refugee muhajirs, most of them came from Turkey also. They didn't feel that it will be really harmful to call them Crimean Turk, not thinking that this will create a political issue. But the name is Crimean Tatars. And in our bylaws, we clearly indicates that Crimean Turks, also known as Crimean Tatars. People should know name of the organization, Crimean Tatars, American Association of Crimean Tatars. And this creates a problem for young people who are born here and they have no idea our relations to Turkey, our relations to Crimea or Uzbekistan or Russia. So young people can get confused. Are we Crimean Turks? Are we Crimean Tatars? So the issue should be closed. We are Crimean Tatars. We are Turkic. We are Turkic, not Turkish. We are part of the Turkic world. So that has to be understood. Crimean Tatars have always been in a difficult situation, whether it was during the Soviet period or 25 years of Ukrainian period or post now the Putin period. Crimean Tatars always had difficulties. They were always oppressed. Their cause were never understood. We were hoping that when Ukraine was declared independent, Crimea they will offer Crimean Tatars to have their territorial autonomy within Ukraine. But Ukraine didn't do that. This did not happen. The 25-year rule of Ukraine, rule of Crimea by Ukraine. So Crimean Tatars now are in a very difficult position. What do they ask? Ukraine has its own political problems. They cannot force Ukraine to do anything for Crimea now. Ukraine has to be free itself first. But once the Ukraine is free and returns to the old Ukrainian control of Crimea, the Ukrainian government can really officially, not only in words, but officially announce the territorial autonomy of Crimean Tatars within the Ukrainian border. Crimean Tatars do not want to work with the Russians. The past 250 years, 300-year history has shown that Russians have always abused Crimean Tatars. But Ukrainians are getting the upper hand now. That I believe that they can really free Crimea and retake Crimea from the Russian control. If that happens, the Crimean Tatars should be ready to have their territorial autonomy within Ukraine, and they should really work on it, and that should be their goal. If once we have our territorial autonomy, then we can establishing our language, establish our national identity for good, really, and this will be a good opportunity. But in the meantime, they have to work with Ukraine to try to really lay the groundwork for establishment of the territorial autonomy of Crimea. Crimean Tatars should have their territorial autonomy if they want to survive as a nation or a nationality. As you know, the Crimean Tatar language it's one of the languages, endangered languages. We might lose. The young generation might not learn because the young generation is not taught the Crimean Tatar language. So once we have the territorial autonomy within Ukraine, then we can work harder to improve our language, our culture, our history. So this is important. Crimean Tatar territorial autonomy within Ukraine is important. Yeah. My advice if they ask me, I would say, never forget your past. Never forget where you came from, where your family came from. We have a very tragic history. Learn your history, study your history. They don't have to be politically active and, you know, carry banners on the streets, but know who you are, know your language. You know that Crimea is your homeland. Crimea is the only homeland Crimean Tatars have. That's why we are all struggling, going through difficult times to make the world understand that we have no other homeland but Crimea. And young people should follow this. They should never forget where they came from. They should espouse Crimean Tatar cause, and that's very important. Once the Jamiyat building is established, we will have, inshallah, more programs towards that, teaching Crimean Tatar young people what Crimea is, what means to be Crimean Tatar. We should teach them, we are going to teach them our language, our history, and this way the people will never forget who they are. Crimean Tatar national movement as a goal will have Crimea for Crimean Tatars. Crimean Tatars will not go to Turkey, and Crimea will not be part of Turkey. This is out of a question. Crimean Tatars, young and old, we all want Crimean Tatars to live in Crimea and you know, get along with the other nationalities in Crimea, just like Numan Çelebi Cihan said, establish a Crimea where all the it's like a bouquet of flowers, different flowers representing different nations. We will have a Crimea for every people, but mainly Crimean Tatar is for Crimean Tatars. This is our only homeland. Turkey is not our homeland. Crimean Tatars have been forcibly leaving Crimea and emigrating to the Ottoman Empire and then to Turkey. But their main goal is to remain in Crimea and have Crimea Tatar as their homeland. Do you know that Crimean Tatars who left Crimea, they were settling, they went to Romania, Bulgaria. Why? They said one day the roads will be open and they will be able to return to Crimea. One example, my grandmother, my wife's grandmother, always kept his bohça aside, saying that one day they will return to Crimea. They lived in Turkey for so many years, but still, until she died, Hediye, her name was Hediye, until she died, she said that she wanted to return to Crimea. Even the Crimean Tatars, wherever they are, they want to return to Crimea, and they want to have Crimea as the Crimean Tatars' homeland. This is our homeland. There's no question, no matter how oppressive the Russia is. As I always say, until there's one Crimean Tatar left in the world, that Crimean Tatar will still want to have Crimea as his homeland. Crimea is important to all of us.
We're finished.
We're finished.
Okay, because we were going to say